Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Antpod. This is now episode 29, and this is a part 2 to episode 4, all about Leafcutters. Yes, we are redoing the Leafcutter episode, as it's one of the most requested episodes. Now, last time, the Antpod was just me, no one else, and guests on board. We had Rich and Sid last time, which are both here today again. Hello to you too.
Hello.
And last time, well, I didn't have any Leafcutters. Sid was only testing prototypes and nothing was officially being sold yet. And Rich was Rich had a little bit more experience with keeping the Leafcutters. And I want to ask already you, Rich, is there anything you've changed over this past year and a half since you kept the first Leafcutters to how you keep them now? Is it the same? Have you learned? Last time was a very steep learning curve for both you and Sid. But now, at least from my side, Leafcutters are just everyday business, more than something exciting.
Yeah, we've changed everything. We've simplified everything. I think the problem before is there's a lot of stress around Leafcutters, so everything was overcomplicated. And it's something I had done. I'd overcomplicated it when really these pots that we raise them in need hydrating once every few weeks. They, literally as long as there's leaves going into those pots, that's as easy as it is. So we've just simplified our procedure, and deaths have dropped significantly because of it.
Yeah, I've been being very rude right here. Of course, hello to you, Rich. You are the guy behind Antics, and we actually have your co-worker Sam with us for the first time in quite a few episodes. Hello to you, Sam, as well.
Hello.
So last time you said something about how you had a day and night cycle with colder nights and hotter days. Is this still something you're doing?
We don't even do that anymore. Yeah, it was overcomplicating it. I was worried. I was trying to cover bases that didn't need covering before. So we just do a flat 24.5 degrees with a half a degree swing on that. We use an oil heater to heat a tent, and that's where we keep them. It's really that simple. Some plastic shelves in there. They're super easy to raise en masse.
All right, so now I just have a question then. How do you keep the oil radiator at a steady temperature? Is it like a smart one?
Yeah, just using a thematic controller, with a probe and a plug that switches on and off. Obviously, in the summer when it's hot, we've got a cooling function as well, and we put an air conditioner into the tent and run the exhaust out the window. So yeah, it can do heating and cooling, no problem.
Yeah, well, I tried to do something like that, but when I plugged my oil radiator into the like sensor thing, I just blew the fuse because it was only a 2 amp fuse. So yeah, that was my idea.
Amps.
Yeah,
yeah.
It was meant for heating cables.
You want a 13 amp fuse, kid?
Yeah, but it was like a special one to turn on and off whenever it was hot and cold. So
right.
So it was only meant for heating cables, and as soon as I plugged it in, it just...
the thermostat. Yeah, the trick is don't use one for... I don't suppose you know the make, Sam, of what we're using upstairs, do you?
I don't. I can find out and message him though.
Yeah, we'll message you what one we're using, but it isn't designed for animals. It's designed to keep like greenhouses at the correct temperature and things. And it's super stable.
Yeah, I need to get my hands on one of them because my Leafcutters have not survived this winter too well so far, with a lot of fungi dying and struggle to find fresh leaves for them to eat. But that's something we'll go a little bit into later in the podcast. We of course also have Sid on board today, and Sid is of course the man who made the first the first Leafcutter pot that was sold to a big amount of people, and it's, from my perspective, kind of the basic founding setup now. And of course, last time you were here, you hadn't even tested that pot. You were still in development of the prototype pot. Can you explain a little bit of what happened from the prototype pot to the final design?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember back, but it feels like it was only a couple of months ago we did the last one. But it's got to be like a year now. I mean, yeah, at that time, I mean, I was new into to leafcutter keeping, and I'm trying to think back as to how far along I was. I'm not sure if we'd started the mass testing yet between.
We hadn't.
No, we'd not done that far. So obviously,
That
yeah,
really
I mean,
we done the last one that
Sorry?
long ago. Was it
We
really?
recorded it the 12th of September 2021. That was the recording day.
wow. So
I wasn't even selling them then, was I?
yeah,
I
well, I
had
picked them
them,
up from
but-
you. I think it was like in end of July, wasn't it?
Oh wow, yeah, it was.
Yeah, and I feel like I think by that point I'd probably gone past that little founding stage, and I think I'd gone into some form of a larger pod, I guess, by that stage. So yeah, I mean, it's that was very, very early days, and obviously based on the last pod, we had limited data back from the results and things, and obviously, God, it's moved so far forward since then. I mean, the leaf cutting hobby in general has just rocketed ahead. I mean, it's hard to find serious ant keepers now that don't really have a colony of leaf cutters. I think most of the content creators, most of the YouTubers, have probably picked up a colony in the last year. Yeah, I mean, there's very few. If they don't have them, I'm sure they're on their to get list very soon. But yeah, it was. I think it was one of the things holding back them as a species in the hobby, because there wasn't really. I don't think there was a really a setup that people had an option to buy that was not DIY. I mean, I know there was a few sort of request items, round sort of acrylic pods and things, but even with those, there was elements of having to put clay balls or figure own substrate and stuff like that. So and then there was also, most of them I think were sold often in 3-pod sets, so the costs were quite expensive. So yeah, these pods were, I think, the first thing that's enabled people to sort of easily get into it and not have that fear factor, because the success rate of them with regards to founding has been is way higher than I would have even expected. It's quite tremendous to see how many people have kind of founded colonies in them, had very few issues, even though they weren't designed for sort of heating, sort of with heat cables as such. People have done a lot of sort of adaptations to make it work, and they seem to be doing fine. So yeah, I mean, they were originally designed to be ambient heated, but it's not stopped people using them in another way. So yeah, I've learned a lot from them. They're definitely not perfect, but every time a new version comes out, it gets better than the previous version. I think that's probably like version 3 of that type, and there's obviously the newer range coming out, which will have a lot more expansion options and things and make things simpler. But yeah.
And for all wondering when this next generation will come out, do you have like a time set for people?
I mean, ultimately, it depends on the results. So there are physical prototypes in testing, but really, I'm being a little bit held back because it needs to go out for a sort of wider testing range, and possibly some more founding colonies, because testing things with with established colonies, the results aren't quite as accurate because they're definitely more hardy. So in theory, everything should be fairly straightforward, but the whole point of the newer range is to increase the feature base, really the value for money, increasing a little bit more range and things, and bringing costs down. There's a lot I've learned, especially when it comes to an Outworld point of view, because it can be, even with the current pod, it can become very expensive if you start adding lots of them together. And then obviously there's a lot more that I guess we'll touch in later, but with regards to the behavior, the requirements of leaf cutters, a lot's changed, especially when it comes to things like the hydration and their ability to self-hydrate when they get to certain sizes. So a lot's been learned, and all that stuff learned will be factored into the features that are needed or not needed in certain products.
Yeah, I've been a little bit in on the development, or at least idea based, and yeah, it's a whole other mindset we have now. That hydration is just a changed topic at all altogether. We of course also sit with Mr. Jake, and Jake, you are the newest Leafcutter keeper among the panel of today. We also have Lynn, but Lynn, you don't keep Leafcutter, so you of course are not the newest. I think we should just go a little bit around to explain what we have done with our setups. And Jake, you have a little bit of a hybrid setup. What does your setup look like, and how have you found it and grown your colony?
Well, me atters, they're currently got the Leafcutter pod, and then they're piped off to like an open fish tank at the moment, and then they're inside of my incubator, so they are like ambient heated at I think about 23-ish degrees at the minute, but they don't seem to mind too much. But yeah, they've got their tank, and I can just chuck as much food as I want in, and 2 inches of PTFE seems to hold them in for like about a month. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that you are a very clever man, unlike other people among us, me, because you have gone with the slow and steady way of not feeding them that many leaves. How's your feeding schedule with the ants?
Well, for a long time, it was literally just like about 10 leaves, maybe every 5 days. Although I have recently, after watching your video and seeing your fungus shrink, I panicked a bit. So I have been up in there feeding a bit. But I'm going to have to stop that because it's literally doubled in size in about 2 weeks. So I kind of want to reel it back in and save my leaves. But yeah.
Yeah, and I've of course gone a little bit not that clever way looking back at it because I've always wanted my colony to grow big. I remember at Ancon last year I looked at Sid's fungi and we were like, oh okay, they have actually about the same size today, and of course I got mine way later than Sid. Looking back, Sid has made a clever choice of not giving them that many leaves because I don't have enough pots, so I've built DIY products. I'm using the old prototypes. I'm using every box I can find for them, and they're escaping left, right, and center of all the products except the new Leafcutter pot. The new Leafcutter pot from Wakooshi is the only one that actually works. The prototypes, they have shown some good flaws, and they are flaws that I'm fighting with now, as they're escaping left, right, and center from everything. So every morning and every evening, I check all the connections to see if there's any escapees. And every 2 days or so, they are escaping somewhere. So, yeah. I think a lot of people were scared that Ada would be very hard to keep down if you just had them. But after talking with a lot of people, and something we're also going to talk about now / in a bit, is if you just control the feeding, Ada can be just as fine as acromyrmex. Acromyrmex are, of course, a little bit smaller and more, I wouldn't say easier to keep because they're a little bit more picky of what they want to eat, but they have always been considered a little bit easier to keep regarding their growth. And yeah, it's definitely changed a lot, and I think that's also why Ada has become quite a bit normal with the new with the pots for them as well. Rich, you have a little bit
way harder.
Yeah, just take the mic, Rich.
They're way harder, and Sam will agree. Whenever we've got Atta, the Atta just grow. They're happy to see you with food. They just cut. They're just no bother. Acro, they seem to stall, and they're so aggressive too, way more aggressive than Atta are. They'll be charging you and biting you, and they're fussy on what they eat and what they don't eat. Yeah, I think Atta's just a breeze to keep in comparison.
I couldn't agree more. My acros never ate anything, and they were sitting at the lid in the outwall, so every time I had to feed them, they just attacked. Whereas the other had a fungi twice the size and even more workers, and they were just waiting for food.
Aggressive, are they? Yeah, no. They just wait patiently. You put the food in, they go to it.
I was quite surprised when I got me acros. I went to put some food in, and they fully were going at the tweezers and everything, and it was really a surprise after the atters, because the atters were just oh, it's feeding time, great.
Yeah,
but that was it.
Friendly, they're like, cheers, lad. I needed this. Whereas the acro, where are you? I'm gonna have you.
I'm gonna
They just
fight
want to
you.
bite you.
Yeah, they do, don't they? You had one latched onto you the other day, didn't you, Sam?
I showed you the
come
cut.
down
I posted it in
bleeding.
Discord.
Yeah.
Yep. It's like, what you've been attacked by? I was like, acro.
Yeah.
Straight away.
Of course it was, the spiny little things.
And that's just funny because before we all started really keeping leafcutters, it was acromyrmex was easy, Ada was hard, and it's just completely changed. Or it's not changed, but it's just our mindset have indeed
Also
changed.
helps the type of atta. Mexicana are so forgiving because they're found in cities and sewers and things like that. They're really forgiving to temperature swings. They can recover from a lot, and I think that does help. You know, I love Mexicana for that reason. They're just a breeze to keep. They're used to walking sidewalks and just picking whatever leaves they can find. And ours have done it. You know, they escape and they're from us to the church, just clearing out every weed along the pathway. So, you know, their lack of fussiness and their adaptability to urban environments, I think, really does help make them an easier species to keep.
And I think that leads well into your setup. So you of course have your big main colony. You also have all the colonies you sell. But how have you grown your main colony, the display colony? And what kind of setups are they in now?
So we just feed them and feed them and feed them. But the problem we have, and this impacts the colony a lot, is whenever a customer does something wrong and their colony's in decline, we're responsible, aren't we? So, you know, they can purchase donor fungus from us and we ship that out. It's only a service we do for our customers, not to other stores' customers. But we will sell a chunk of our own fungus to help other people's colonies. And that hit our colony hard this year, and it declined the colony back down to one pod. You know, we had a heat wave and boom, people's funguses were dying and we were having to send some out to customers. You know, the cold hits in and catches people off guard and boom, we have to send, you know. And we had a couple of colonies delayed in shipping as they were heading to customers, you know, with all of the strikes and things, and we have to send donor fungus for that. So that's what's hit us the hardest.
So what kind of setups do you have then?
It's pretty much the same as it was, just a glass tank over pods. But the difference now is that the glass tank is sealed shut so that they can bring the fungus and grow it outside of the pods instead of being in an exposed place, you know. But it still has the pipes through the ceiling on the trellis all the way back to the external outworld.
That's smart. That's smart thinking. And finally, we of course have Sid. And Sid, you are mainly working with prototype setups. What is your journey from beginning to now regarding the setups?
Well, to be honest, the Atta they haven't changed from when they were on display in Ancon. They're still in the really tall pod. You know, I was touching on an experiment with regards to potentially looking at how high they could grow a fungus. That was something which I was working on, but decided to put on pause when we ran into that insane heat wave in summer. And it started creating a lot of problems and the temperatures and things. And I thought, you know what, it's creating too much condensation. So I decided just to stop throughout a big portion of summer of overfeeding them. Because one of the troubles you can get is as they grow and as they're cutting leaves, they're bringing these, you know, moisture filled leaves into the pods, and that's creating a lot of humidity. Too much so, you know, where it becomes if it's too bad, it can start becoming a problem in itself. So I kind of stopped that experiment and put it on pause because generally it wasn't a major, it wasn't data I needed too much. And I've just focused, obviously, shortly after that, then there was more of the ideas of working on the new range. So I've decided, well, let's not grow them out because I may want to move them into other setups and, you know, so to make things easier. So they're very much in the same one. The Acro, on the other hand, they are in the same pod that they were in, but they've now, rather than having another pod as in the Outworld, they're in one of the sort of prototype Outworlds. They're also connected up to a prototype of the new version of the pods. but they're being quite stubborn with regards to expanding into it. So, but like touching on obviously, having both of them, I can say that there are definitely differences between the two species, and I don't want to say that acro or atta are easier. They're very different, and I think they're actually probably on the same, in some ways, on the same level of ease. The atta, the one thing that makes atta more challenging, they are definitely a lot easier when it comes to feeding. I will definitely say that they probably take 4 times as many leaf options. They're much more forgiving with the types of leaves you feed them. The acro can be quite fussy, but they will still readily take bramble and privet. Both of them will love that. So if you have those options, you shouldn't really have too much of a trouble. But the biggest challenge with atta comes to if you ever need to move the fungus or you want to move the colony. I would happily put my hand in the outworld, rummage around, cleaning trash in the acro. You will not catch me doing that with the atta. Those super mages. I've had the smaller mages bite, and they will cut through skin. I've never been bitten by one of the supers, but they will. I imagine they would glide quite nicely, like you're through skin like butter. So that's where I think one of the main challenges can come from atta. From a kid point of view, depending on how they handle ants and things. Acro, I would suggest to anyone who's maybe nervous about handling ants, or generally, when it comes to cleaning, there's no acro which will do more than just a little nip and you'll feel it. But I don't think it would ever draw blood or really hurt all that much. It couldn't be said the same for atta. So if you're experienced adult,
draw blood.
An acro,
yeah, yep.
Well, it must have been on a very, very soft area of skin or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, it has to be at a certain point in the ridge. There's certain parts of your finger they can't get. Say, like a thick part of skin in the thumb, no. But it was on my finger as I was.
Anyone.
Yeah, I mean, like a rare scenario, but typically, like the acros, the smaller. When I did that little recording, there's a video of it somewhere. But on the tough end, the tough skin on the end of the finger. One of the atta, smaller, medium sized workers was just cutting through it, no problem. So God knows what they'd be doing to a soft area of skin. But typically, just handling them in general, I would confidently lift an acro fungus and move it into a new pod or relocate it without any real worry. Whereas I wouldn't do the same with the atta. That's probably one of the main differences. Funny enough, with regards to growth rate, I actually got my acro afterwards, and my acro now have a larger fungus than my atta do. So, you can population control both of them. So, if I gave them leaves, I've got no doubt the atta would grow larger, quicker. But if you actually feed them about the same, they actually grow about the same. I've been a little bit more. I've actually fed my my acro a little bit more to kind of so they could catch up, and they've definitely done that. And what I've also noticed is the fungus actually seems a little bit more robust. It could be that it lives longer, but it definitely the die off on the acro fungus. From my personal experience, it seems to last a bit longer in the same scenario.
I think
it seems chunkier. It looks more robust. It seems chunkier. I mean, I guess with everything,
built, doesn't it?
It's a different type of fungus, so it may have a different lifespan. It may just like have a 20% more, longer lifespan. But it's if they go through the same feeding patterns, and I've gone recently where I've left them quite a period of time to between feedings, and the atta have fallen back quite a lot. That could be relative to the amount of workers. So there's a lot of factors to play in, but both in similar setups to what they originally were. Still really enjoying both, but they haven't changed a whole lot.
Yeah, I can say I have tested being bitten by a super major. It was by mistake doing exactly cleaning. I was cleaning the outworld of leaves or of sticks because I fed them sticks with leaves on. My recommendation is to try to avoid that as much as possible because it's just a lot easier to just pull the leaves off. Of course, you can't do it with bramble, but what I do with like privet and whatever is I try to just pull the leaves off because then there's no cleaning afterwards, which When you have a big colony, saves a lot of time. But I was cleaning my Ada, and I saw a super major, and she was very aggressive. Normally, I can actually pick up the super majors. My fiance thinks it's quite funny playing with them because they're so confused and not really aggressive. But when I did that clean, all the ants turned into a very aggressive mode. I was getting bitten all over my arms, and it hurt a lot. It actually hurt more than the acros, just because they walked up my arm before they bite, or bit before they started biting me, where the acros just seemed to just bite straight away almost. But I got bitten by a super major, and just like you see when they start the cut of a leaf, it burrowed the jaw into my finger. Not my finger, but it was actually right at the soft spot between my thumb and my finger. So I followed it a little bit. I wanted to see what she did because she was aggressive. And she just burrowed her jaw in and started cutting my finger like if it was a leaf. And the worst thing is I couldn't pull her off. She didn't want to go off. I couldn't get her off, so she was just biting me, and it was very painful experience.
This was your Mexicana?
Yes. I haven't seen it before, but it was just when I cleaned them. I think it triggered some kind of defense, because normally when I touch them, they got confused and run away.
And I opened this and I was saying how little babies Atta are in comparison to Acro, and everyone's having different experiences to us. Maybe it's because our outworld isn't as populated as yours, so they're not as aggravated. Maybe it's just because we deal with smaller colonies, and in smaller sizes, Acro are a lot more aggressive. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear what it's like when they're all getting bigger.
I will definitely second the fact that they are definitely they're more timid. They're not as aggressive as Acro. Acro are much more aware to vibration sensitivity, things coming in the outworlds, and they will actively try and bite you. And I think that when we're saying these examples of them biting, in the scenario where I was bitten, that was really more of an experimental force bite. It didn't initially, it didn't initially bite me. I had to kind of get it to a point where it was on, it was kind of at the point I wanted to bite, and then just hold it in place slightly until its bite was more of a defensive mechanism rather than actually doing it out of its own willing. And it may be the case for the majors, with
I agree. I agree with you.
With Holifer, obviously, it may have been as a result of it being on his hand. He may have pushed it down on his hand or something when he was handling the stick, and it's caused him to bite. I mean, he may have been following. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying they don't bite. I'm sure they do it. It's their kind of their main job.
No, I don't think they really bite in defense. I have multiple times wanted to make like a TikTok because you've seen the what's it called, the Braveness Wilderness guy. I can't remember his name. Where he got bitten by others, and I was like, I want to test that. I want to get it on video because I know people will say, why you do that? And then it's funny. But every time I put an other worker on me, they'd never forcefully bite me. They never bite me. It is not until I actually clean them and I disturb them. That cleaning session took an hour and a half to clean the leaves in the outworld because I'd been a little bit lazy. And it was like an hour in, so they were all really, really annoyed with me, and they just kept attacking me. And I kept brushing them off with my fingers to get them away. So I think that's what made them go a little bit nuts. Because normally, back when my acros were alive, just like you say, whenever you just looked at them, they almost went crazy. Whereas the Ada, you could go down and touch the fungi without them actually. Back in the day, not now, but back in the days.
See, we've got heaps of acro in stock. We've got heaps of them, but we've also got Rob J's colony, which is much bigger. Because when he went away, we had all of his colonies of everything to look after. And yeah, they're always doing something. The Atta don't seem nearly as active for the most part as those acro. And like you say, they're always on the lid. They're always waiting. I really enjoy watching them, and they're very pretty as well.
Oh yeah, I love their spines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Atta's got the nice glossy heads, and I think one thing as well is that with the Atta, the average worker size is much smaller than acro. You know, the average worker size of the acro is much bigger, making them easier to see, and I guess that's why you notice the aggression more, because they're bigger jaws charging you. Whereas with the minims and the miners of the Atta, you just pick them off and you're like, come on, little guy, you really think you're going to do anything?
Yeah, I agree. I do like the looks of the acros a lot more as well, but
and they go white, don't they? With you know, they put the white powder on themselves and they dust themselves up, and they're really pretty. It surprised me how beautiful they are.
Yeah, very pretty. I loved recording them. I'm sad the queen just disappeared, and she's after the entire colony died. They decided to dig the queen up and actually put her at the top of the death pile. So that's the first time I saw her since the fungus was all gone for like 3 months. And then when they all were dead, the queen was dug up. So that's
strange. Do we know why? Have you got any ideas why it happened?
No, it was the beginning of last year. The beginning of 2022, where they were still competing in growth rate with the Adder. The Adder was catching up, but the acros were growing very fast as well. And suddenly they just stopped. And it took me it wasn't until like halfway through summer. So they started acting weird around February. And in summer, I decided to go down and smash the fungus, and there wasn't any brood, and the queen wasn't to be seen. So she had died somewhere in the start of the year, and I don't know why.
It's really sad. Are you going to replace them, or are you just done with Aqua?
I think he's got enough on his hands with those Atta.
Well, the Atta is escaping on a daily basis, so I'm not really looking into getting... that's... at the moment, no, but it really depends on what happens next year with setups and everything. What do you mean?
With the Atta escaping at the point where they're escaping every day, like they were with us, you just go in and you're like, okay, where are you trailing to today?
Yeah, it's just because I don't have the correct Wakooshi tube size, so I have from the Wakooshi tube to my tube. There's tape. That tape lasts a few months until the miners get out. I have an old box where I put cotton in the top because I initially wanted ventilation, but they just kept escaping. So now I tape the cotton, and they also bite through the tape. And just among all it's the nice thing is I can see when they are about to escape because the trash somehow fall out of the setup. So if I come in the morning and I see that there's trash on the floor, I knew I have to push the pots more together because somehow they just detach themselves. It's very strange. But I think the next thing we'll go into is heat and heatness, because my colony have really, really suffered over the last around a month now, because it became minus 10 degrees in Denmark, and I had to, because I have a manually operated heating system, I have to turn the radiator more up, and my oil radiator, and they lost half of all of their fungus. It just became trash, and they filled all the trash chambers up, and yeah, it wasn't good. Now, I don't know if this was because it got cold. What I see is when it gets colder, when it gets below 22 degrees, they stop really cutting. They don't go out to cut. And that's where the fungi is starting to die. So it's not the fungi itself that it's dying due to the coldness. It's because they don't cut. So when it's 22 degrees, I can feed them the same as always, and they just don't cut anything. I don't know if it's something you guys have seen.
Yeah, they won't. If it gets too cold, that's it. They'll just stop cutting. It's like they go into survival mode and they hug the fungus and they overwork it, don't they?
Yeah, what's strange with my colonies, they then decided to put all of that trash on 2 of their other fungi. So before I had 5 separate fungi at one point, and of course I have the long tube fungi. There's fungi all over the tube now. And they just decided to get all of the trash, and not in the trash chamber, no, put all of the trash on their 2 smallest fungi and just killing them instantly. They were all gone within 3 days. It just did. That was a very strange decision. But we have a question from Avalon Ants, who says, what have you learned in your time of keeping Adder? And I think Rich and Sam, you have definitely experimented the most with all of your different store colonies. What have you learned over the time?
I think consistency is key with them. So they just need consistency in everything. They need consistency in the way you feed them. They need consistency in their environment and in their humidity. I think that's literally it. I think the biggest mistake that people make is over worrying and overcompensating for things. So if they think they're too cold, they'll wang it up a couple of degrees, and all of these like big variables. They won't feed them for days, or then they'll feed them every day, and I think the over panicking is what the problem was, or any problem I've had. I think consistency is all they need. Every other day now, without fail, we feed them, and Sam and I do it on a rota of, I'll do one, he does one, or if he's in, he'll do them, and I'll pick up the next one, and the colonies thrive as a result of that.
Yeah, that's very clever. That's very cleverly said.
Your colony was doing fantastic. It was consistent. Everything was the same, and you would feed them the same amount at the same interval, and it got to the point where they knew when the food was coming. And all of a sudden, the temperature crashes, and it's devastating. 72 hours is all it takes from the fungus to go from an alive, healthy state to the dead pile. So it can happen really quick without that consistency. But I think people over panic. They worry about leaf cutters, and they're really easy to keep. You just need a good temperature controller, some good humidity, and a supply of leaves.
For me, it's the easiest colony I have.
Until
the winter just hit hard. But before that, I just dumped some leaf. Then I didn't have to give water and all of that. I didn't have to look for mites and all of this, because they were just kind of there wasn't this protein and all of these different problems. They just needed leaves, and then they were happy.
Well, and this is the thing. They just leaves, and I say this to people all the time, and we've had emails lately of people saying, can I feed them snaps, and should I feed them sugars, and my advice to all of these people is just keep it simple, keep it leaves, go out, pick some fresh leaves. That's all they need. If you want to give them any sort of sweet treat, give them a fruit or anything they can turn into something to grow the fungus with. But they're so simple to keep. You just keep putting leaves in, and the colony does the rest, I've just looked now back to what I was saying earlier about our temperature controller that we use, and it's an Elitech controller, Elitech, and it's a Wi-Fi controller, and it is super accurate. It's got it here. They use it for beer cellars, propagation, fish, reptiles, all sorts, but it's Wi-Fi enabled. I'll send you the link. They're all over Europe, and this is what we use, and it does heating and cooling. So you could put that in your room, set it to 26 degrees, turn your radiators on full, and you don't have to do anything else. This will deal with everything. If the temperature drops, it'll turn your heating on. If it gets too hot, it'll turn a fan on if you want it to, or the aircon.
Yeah, I need that. That's what I thought I could do with the small one, because it's a little bit more dumb, because it can only say when to heat. But yeah, it was meant for heat mats and heat cables, not a radiator. So yeah.
Yeah, it'll do 10 amps as well, and
nice.
A 2 kilowatt heater is 8 amps. So there's plenty in there to run 2 kilowatts of heating.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I'll definitely have to look into that, because
I've just sent it in the thing. But anyone listening, it's called an Elitech controller, and it's the most reliable ones we've ever used.
Well, jumping on to another question, since you and Sam, Rich and Sam, are kind of the customer service of my leaf cutters are struggling, what shall I do? Melchior something have asked, why is my young colony never cutting leaves?
Okay, well, obviously we don't know much from that. We don't know their conditions, or we don't know their temperatures, and we don't know if the humidity's right, and we don't know how soon it is before they're delivered. But the key thing to note is a colony can only grow a fungus as big as it can for the size of the fungus. So if you've got a really small fungus, they're not going to cut and feed it every day. They need to wait for the mold essentially to spread onto the new leaves, and then to go nice white and fluffy, and then they can use that to make more fungus. So the smaller the colony is, the less frequently it needs feeding. So he could very easily be missing them cutting or missing. You notice a small colony, they'll cut a bunch of leaves and then ditch them in the waste pile because they're getting the sugars from those. They're getting the carbs from the leaves, but they're not growing the fungus with it. So really patience and consistency. As long as everything's right, just keep putting in fresh leaves and they will be using them. If the fungus isn't dying, then they're clearly growing it and maintaining it.
Yeah, very wise words. They grow in an exponentially rate, meaning the bigger they get, the more they can grow.
Yeah, because it needs more food, isn't it? And they've got more surface area to grow from.
Exactly, surface area, that's key.
Tiny little golf ball, they might only need 1 or 2 leaf cuttings a week, to spread over that tiny area. But when it's like the size of yours, they're going to be needing a bag of leaves a day to grow that.
Oh, that's the crazy thing. I lost my other fungi. I had considered it lost one of the fungi chambers. It was around the size of an apple, and today, 2 days later, I had 2 good feeding sessions, and now it's triple the size already. I mean, I recorded a TikTok of them, tiny, and the fungi tipped, and it's twice or triple the size in 2 days. They just exploded.
That must be like, when like humans get cold and the first thing they lose is the use of their fingers, and the fingers go and then your arms go. And then as your body shuts down, that must be what your colony have done. They've expanded all of these fungus chambers, and the second conditions worsened, they've decided which ones to cut off and just left them. And then they've kept their core, the core fungus fed.
Oh yeah, the biggest one haven't taken any damage at all. The biggest one lost around, I would say, 15% or something. But two other fungi died in a week. I mean, they were dying out in the past 2 weeks because it got cold. But then when it really got cold, it just died overnight almost.
Yeah.
I mean, Lynn's just made she made a comment, Ninturu, saying that they may have put the trash on top of the fungus. The smaller fungus that you said they dumped the trash on to protect the fungus from the cold. So that, there is a possibility that they were trying to maybe insulate the fungus.
They could have been, but
it could have been
odd, wouldn't it?
Well, possibly. I mean, it's just spitballing ideas. I mean, there's logic there where they could have tried, enclosing it, but obviously as they don't have any soil or any of the natural things they normally do, it could have just been that the fungus died to the point where the whole fungus is just in essence trash, and maybe they just thought, this has now become the new trash pile. So it could have been that.
They could have just left it to die on the outside wherever it would have been affected first, and just left it, and then when conditions restored and they had food, they took that away, and there was still a living fungus in the middle.
I mean, one of the
waste workers wouldn't be allowed back in the colony if they've even been on it, would they?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things I think we should talk a lot about. What trash means, because what we thought last year and what Rich is still a little bit on is whenever workers are working in trash, they get the scent and they're like expelled from the colony. And I can 100% say I don't believe this anymore, because between my biggest fungi and my 4 other fungi pots, they had a trash chamber in the middle, meaning they had to drag their fresh leaves through the trash chamber. This chamber was meant to be a fungi chamber, but they made it into a trash chamber. Yeah, so they have fungi chamber, trash chamber, fungi, and finally a trash chamber. And they had to travel all the way through a trash chamber with all of their leaves. And the queens have also traveled through it, because when the fungi was so dead, I could officially say that the queen wasn't in that fungi. So even the queen have walked in the trash and into a separate fungi container.
Oh, that's really interesting. And the only thing I know for certain, and this is based on Professor Johnson's research from the guy that was at AntCon. The only thing I know for certain is the ages of workers in the departments that they work. So we know the youngest workers with the sharpest jaws are out cutting leaves, and we know the middle-aged workers are grinding leaves in the fungus chamber, and we know the oldest workers with the bluntest of zinc in their jaws are in the waste chamber. So we know that, but everything else has just been speculation, really, isn't it? And could it just be different with Mexicana? Could cephalote, for example, be much more much more fussy about who goes through their waste.
Definitely.
I mean, the thing is, I think that there's probably there needs to be really three categories. There needs to be sort of fungus waste, because I think that there may be a difference between decaying bacterial, sort of death, carcasses and things. And
can I just interrupt?
Because sure, why not?
My dead workers are in the outworld and not in the trash, so they are my colonies at least separating it a little bit.
So I mean, if they are, if that's allowed to decay and get sort of wet and a lot back, then they may treat those workers possibly differently. With regards to mine, they're throwing everything in the outworld. I mean, there's so much, because the outworld's very dry. All the old fungus that's really all the only trash that they make is the occasional little twig, and it's mostly just old fungus, and it's a year's worth of this. I never empty it. And it's got to the point they've built almost like a mountain / substrate floor in the entirety of the outworld. And the outworld's quite big, but they're walking all over it. I put the leaves on top of it. They take the leaves from there. There's literally nothing there's no negative things that come from this, because really it's just dried fungus and leaves. So I don't see it as being a sort of anywhere that bacteria can grow. So that type of trash maybe shouldn't be called trash. It's almost like, I guess, more of a compost heap. We don't know that in the wild, maybe the old fungus is taken to a certain chamber and allowed to kind of compost, because one thing they do is they rotate this waste. They cut chambers through it. They allow airflow. They turn it over. They keep it so that there's no points of it. I mean, they get to the point where they move it from one end of the outworld all the way to the other. So they're continually moving this, and it's almost like they're doing it to allow it to compost naturally. And it could be that maybe that is a way to, maybe they stimulate the plants around them and use that as a type of fertilizer. There's all these different types of things.
Be a nitrogen-rich compost.
They could do things like that. So, but I think there needs to be a bit of a difference though, because there is the waste which I've seen some setups where people are overfeeding them leaves, and leaves are starting to rot. And that's a different scenario, and that's where they're putting things in there. Maybe there's some bugs and bits and bobs that come in on the leaves, and they're growing and breeding in this this decay. So people need to be a little bit careful. There's trash, and then there's trash. And while they're in the same kind of overall category, they should be treated quite differently. And fungus waste I don't think people should consider that as a waste as such. You can usually tell the difference, just because of the appearance of it still has that fungus look, and that's inevitable. The fungus. I think fungus typically has like a lifespan of around in ideal climates. I'd say approximately about 3 weeks, and if people are trying to control their fungus, one of the things they need to bear in mind is, fungus is, in essence, it's like building a house. Leaves that they're cutting and bringing in are in essence bricks, and the fungus is the mortar. And if you don't have mortar, you can't lay any more bricks. So, they need that mortar there to be able to build it up. So, it goes back to that whole exponential growth. When people get a new colony, they need to be aware that they can only grow as fast as they have enough mortar for. So if they have a small amount, then there's only so much they can build. And they know that, which is why people sometimes panic, because they think, they're not cutting anything. A lot of the time, it's just because they've got more workers than they have fungus, and there's nothing for them to necessarily do. So
it does take a lot of time post shipping as well. I mean, the guy that came this morning and he collected his Mexicana colony, already in the Discord they're cutting and they're working on the fungus, because he drove it home and within a couple of hours they were stable again.
Well, that was the same with mine, wasn't it? It was when I collected them from mules, they were cutting straight away. But the ones I had,
3 or 4 days.
Acro, took me a good 4 days or so before I probably saw any cutting from them, because the fungus had all got beaten up, and there was, it was a very small amount of fungus that arrived, but it was about marble size in the end. But it took them a while, because it was such a small fungus. It took them a while to get going, but when they did, it was quite steady. So people just shouldn't panic as long as you've got the live fungus, and that quite often that's either a kind of nice white fungus or a dark green where you can see the leaves are freshly mixed into it. When it starts getting that sort of yellowy browny color, that usually indicates it's the fungus they can no longer use as mortar, and that's pretty much the stuff that that's going to be turned to trash soon enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also what I love with seeing the small dying fungi. It's just one big black ball now. That's just the wonders to see. I think Sid will answer this one, but one of the big scary things that was around talking about with Ada was that the queen could lay 10,000 eggs a day, and you would have tens of millions of workers. I don't know how many. You will have a lot of workers.
Isn't it?
It's a lot. I don't know if there's anyone who've counted them, but yeah, it's a lot at least. And I can say that my colony is huge. I have so many workers, and every time they escape, it's insane. It takes hours, like a lot of hours. It's a half a day to just clean them up, which means when I had an escape where my fiance's brother was living in next door in a guest room, and he got woken up by Ada all over him. And it was around 2 a.m. The escape was noticed, and I had to work. And I just made it to work, cleaning everything up around 7. But Sid, how big is your colony? Because you're, of course, doing the big, not feeding them that much. How many workers do you think they have?
Well, my fungus is exactly the same size as it was at AntCon in May. So, you can definitely regulate them. And the scary thing is, it like kind of going back to the previous point, a fungus has a lifespan of about 3 weeks. So it usually has about a week in that newer stage where they've just, added the leaves to it. In the sort of second week, roughly, that will then, the fungus will start to grow around those newer leaves, and it will start to bloom, and it will be that really nice sort of lush white color. And then in the last week, they start to deteriorate, and it starts going towards that yellowy browny color. But by that point, it's usually had multiple layers of the fresher stuff put on top. And then obviously they excavate the bottom side. But so if you bear in mind that, if you have a bad 3 weeks, either through temperature, through, so it doesn't matter if your fungus is, fills out 20 outworlds. If you have a bad couple of weeks, the entirety of that can be gone. So by just having a massive fungus doesn't really necessarily mean that you're in any way safer than someone who has a fungus the size of 1/8 the amount you've got. They still, it all works the same way. It ages the same way. It's just as vulnerable. So you're still liable to have those large crashes, but if you have a larger amount, you just lose a larger amount. So you do need to be a little bit careful in some regards, but at the same time, that enables you to kind of, if you know the time frames and the amount you're feeding, touching back on one of the points that Rich said, consistency is key. That couldn't be more important when it comes to leaf cutters, because when you get them to a certain level and you're happy with that level, if you're feeding them leaves, you get a gauge. You'll learn the amount of leaves that you're generally feeding them. Whether it be a small bag or whatever. If you keep feeding them that same amount, that fungus will not change in size. So because it will grow as fast as it's deteriorating. So it's just it's that simple 3-week cycle. If you keep giving it the same amount, they can only grow the same amount, and that amount will deteriorate in the same cycle. So the only way it will grow is if you upscaling your growth. So if you're adding more leaves, just like you were doing when you're throwing whole trees in there and stuff, that naturally, there's right. Ants have been around a lot longer than us, and there's a reason they're so damn successful. They know exactly what they're doing. They don't mess around. They know, they're far more intelligent in a lot of ways than we could ever be with regards to understanding nature, seasons, cycles, temperature, rainfall, everything. They're very, very smart. When it comes to controlling the size of the colony, they're just as smart as well. They're not going to foolishly, they've not lived this long by just having a queen throwing out 10,000 eggs when the colony can't support those kind of numbers.
And that's what I also want to ask, because what I found fascinating was you had a theory of the fungi actually determines how many eggs the queen lays. I don't know if you remember your thoughts of that.
Well, I mean, sustain, don't they?
It would marry up with how the colony's gone so far. Everything. I'm not claiming. I'm in no way claiming to be an expert on leafcutters.
No. It's just your thoughts.
This is just purely just based on having them, keeping them. But just again based on feedback from seeing others and keeping them personally myself. I kind of try to experiment a lot with my personal colonies to try and prove and disprove a lot of myths about various different things, because I think that there's so much in the ant keeping hobby that people just say out there, but it's based on no real facts and there's no real evidence to back stuff up. And that's why I like to try and sort of push the boundaries of things, even like when it comes to temperature and things. I've had mine, both my colonies in exactly the same room. They are, they're kept in exactly the same conditions. The temperatures range, I've heating fell down in the cold very recently. They went, 2 weeks where they were probably pushing around about 19 degrees. And the fungus didn't really deteriorate much. They didn't have a lot of feedings in that time, so I can't really comment too much on what their feeding habits were like. But the fungus itself didn't deteriorate a whole lot. I'm not recommending that to anyone, but it's one of the things not to panic. If it does for short periods of time drop as low as sort of 19, don't panic. And similarly, both of these colonies have gone up to, I think, about 31, 32 degrees. Not for long periods of time, but there's this whole theory of it'll sterilize the colony. Again, not saying it's not true, but both of mine are not sterile colonies. They're still producing brood, and they were at 32 for a good period of time when we had the heat wave in the summer, and they were definitely above sort of 28, to ranging between 28 and 30 for a couple of days.
Did you then see any effect on the colony?
Oh, well, the definitely effect. Yeah. I mean, the fungus gets absolutely destroyed when you get to those temperatures. And I had a huge die off after that 32. My acro fungus just probably fell back to about a quarter in size over the matter of a week. So it definitely, high temperatures, low temperatures doesn't seem to affect them as much. But those high temperatures, so when you're talking 20, 27 degrees plus, that will drastically reduce the lifespan of a fungus. Now, I don't think short bursts are what necessarily kill it off, but definitely longer periods, like anything, everything's okay within moderation. But it affected both the colonies drastically. That 32 day didn't sterilize the queens, didn't kill any workers, but drastically affected the fungus. So, I mean, those are kind of the points I've got, I guess, from keeping them.
All right. Well, I think we never went over to Jake to ask what you have learned keeping Ada and your acros. So is there anything you have learned over the past few months that you've kept them that you want to share?
That's a good question, that one. Ooh. Not really anything that Rich and Sid haven't said, although I can definitely agree with the compost idea, because mine put all of their kind of, I don't know, twigs and dead bodies, they're like in an outworld where it's nice and dry, whereas they keep all their compost in like a moist little chamber, and it's kind of, they're still kind of fermenting it, if you get what I mean. They're up to something with it. Otherwise, they'd probably just take it outside and dump it in that trash. But yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely... Huh?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Lynn has a good question because she's silently in the background. What would you say is the best species for people who don't have too much money? Sid.
The cheaper one. I mean, ultimately, it depends.
It's almost the same.
If you don't have much money, I don't necessarily say that these are the best ants for you to keep. But similarly, that being said, they are really cheap. Once you get the setup and you get the ants, I mean, the ants, that Rich is making headways when it comes to the ants, bringing the cost of them down. The average price of leaf cutters probably a year ago, 2 years ago, you're probably talking about £180 150 for I think usually acro. So they they have fallen a lot. So they've had a sort of but just as with anything, when things are becoming more stable and sort of new import lines are being opened, which is I'm sure managed to work on that. And with regards to setups, I'm kind of looking to try and make things again just get cheaper. So as the things go on, things are more mass produced, things are more widely available, things will just get cheaper. So it's got considerably, I'd probably say it's like 30% cheaper than it was 2 years ago, and I think that will continue further along the line. And but obviously the ants themselves are quite an investment. They're not the cheapest of ants, but acro are generally the cheaper ones compared to atta, and they're slightly slower growing, I would say. So that would make the setups probably cheaper because you wouldn't have to expand them as much. So yeah, I mean the cheaper ones to start with would be the acro. Yeah. And so then I mean there's another question there. Who don't like high maintenance?
Low maintenance, really, aren't they?
I mean, to be honest, actually, Leafcutters they are the probably okay. Right, we're going to exclude Holofer out of this, but I'd say both my Leafcutters are my least maintenance ants of every ant I keep. They are
just food.
They're super easy. I mean, we've not really discussed food, but there's a lot of things you can do with food. You can I personally gather I take one of these big grip lock bags, those plastic sealable bags, and if you pick leaves in bulk, and you keep them in those bags, because of the amount of moisture in the leaves, they actually stay hydrated. So if you get a big bag, that would probably last enough for a week or 2 weeks. You can actually feed a load of them from the bag, seal it up, and those leaves will stay good for about a week. So you can almost go. You can almost just go and pick leaves maybe twice a month, and you could do that. It could work. So it's not like people imagine, I've got to go out every day and pick leaves. I mean, Holofer probably does, but most people who don't want to feed trees to their colony can get away with it. Like mine, for example, I will go out no more than twice a month. And people have tried things like freezing leaves as well. I'm not too sure how well that's gone. I'm not too sure how that might, freezing it may affect the genetic buildup of the leaves and whether that affects the fungus growth. I wouldn't imagine it would.
I've just seen after it's frozen, the leaves dry insanely quick indoor.
Could be, yeah.
So that's my personal seeings. That now it's a little bit colder, so they don't cut as much, and the leaves are just bone dry after only a day almost. Where in summer they could last. I mean, they never really lasted that long, but they stayed humid for a lot longer.
I'm like the total other end in this thing because I've been feeding my girls like dry leaves, and I just go out and I'll pick like literally a few kilos of leaves and just stick them in a massive paper bag, and I just let them dry out. And the attas and the acros have been taking them no problem at all dry. I just make sure to keep the humidity up, or just keep an eye on it, but it's been working really well.
Well, leaves can rehydrate, so if there's enough high humidity in there, there's a possibility they're rehydrating. I mean, based on no actual science, I would just assume that the sort of more fresh leaves, because I'm under the idea that the ants feed from the leaves they're cutting, and when they're going through the process of cutting the leaves, they're taking the natural sugars. And this is obviously what I assume is what makes them choose certain leaves. There's a reason they seem to be quite big fans of often fruit leaves, things apple leaves and bramble and such, because they likely contain large amounts of sugar in the liquids that they secrete when they're cutting the leaves. So by just putting sugars in with them, it's kind of shown that they really do like sugars. So if I put sugars just in a little pot, put it in there, they'll go nuts for it. But naturally that will slow them down wanting to cut. So that's where they may well take the dried leaves, just like they, there's a lot of things. Ninaturi's made a comment about what things you can feed to them on the side.
Yeah, she's on fire with comments.
she's firing some brilliant questions.
I always give them a choice. So I give them a choice of dried and fresh. So, she mentioned oats. Well, yeah, oats, Rice Krispies, dried leaves. They've always got a dry option and they've always got a wet option with me. And I think that's important because there'll be pockets of fungus that need drying out a little bit and there'll be pockets that need hydrating, and it gives them the choice to use it to microclimatize how they want to, doesn't it?
And there's lots of things you can substitute and buy time with. So sometimes if I'm going to go a long period of time without feeding, there's things like flaked almonds. They're huge fans of. They actually cut them up into little pieces. Flaked almonds, Rice Krispies, oats. You can go as far as to buy store-bought goods, lettuce and that type of stuff, broccoli, but just be very careful that it can be slightly risky because of fungicides and pesticides that they sometimes treat on human foods. So that's the only concern that I might have with those types of things. If any food was treated with them, that's colony wipe. So there's an element of risk there. So careful where you get the foods from, but there's no reason you can't do those types of things.
Yes, I have something to add to that, because that's one of the more controversial things I've done quite a lot. Is I've bought salads and all kind of weird things from the store.
Yeah.
And I feel after, of course, I've been very public with my leaf cutters, and I get criticism for whatever I do. If I get leaves near a highway or near a road, people are like, "Oh, don't take them near a road." If I get leaves in, this is not because I do it. I try not to.
Why from a road? What's a road going to do?
Because people say the exhaust gas lands on the leaves and then the ants get them, and that's
God.
bad. Yeah, that's the thing. There's everything.
Come on.
Because also don't take the leaves from close to the ground because dogs can pee on them. Don't take the leaves from here. Don't take the leaves from there. And I've just realized that, you no matter where you take the leaves, people can say something bad about those leaves you're taking. And I have gone into the store and bought leaves multiple times. Now I don't know if it's. I'm guessing it's a European staple that you can also get. But in Denmark we have something called eco food, something like that. I don't know if translation, but that means that it's not treated with any chemicals. So it's a little bit.
It's like an organic food shop.
Yeah, so there's the broccoli, and then there's like the organic broccolis, and I go for the organic stuff. It's a little bit more pricey, and then I can avoid to go out. I go out every 2 days to get leaves for them, just to maintain their size. So I fill up like a big bag, and that lasts 2 days if they like the leaves.
I mean, the other thing to note as well when it comes to people complaining about things like the things getting, dogs peeing and like. These ants, they do check the leaves. That things like pesticides and that's a little bit difficult because they've not come across those things in a while. But things pee on the leaf in nature,
yes,
so
they do.
There's no matter where they're getting them from in the wild doesn't mean some animal's not peed on it. So I'm a firm believer of just rocking things quite naturally. I just get them from fields, from woods and stuff, and I don't really think about things too much. Naturally, obviously, I'm not going to get them from any farmlands or things where there's crops grown or anything along those lines. But if you're just sensible with things, you shouldn't have any issue. I wouldn't worry about exhaust fumes and things like that. I mean, yeah,
also...
you have to remember the rate in which these leaves quite often grow. They're not that old themselves, so the chances of them actually picking up anything substantial are negligible anyway. So yeah, I think some people are getting a little bit too over concerned and just trying to cause trouble.
I made a story of me cutting leaves with snow on them, and I just fed the leaves with snow to my ants, and people were like, "Oh wait, don't you think they'll freeze now?" But I'm like, it's a 26-degree room. It's not going to be snow for very long.
Well, the likelihood is they'll just avoid the snow until it melts. I mean, exactly. It's the same with wet leaves. Yeah, so feeding shouldn't be too much. It's obviously a big factor with leaf cutters. People do panic about the foods, but experimentation is key. And when I first got mine, I just got 4 small leaves from 4 different plants. I put them in there and I just saw which one they went for. And then I just ran that experiment with a few different things. And, it's a fun process as well as anything else, as long as you just find that one. But usually things like privet and bramble, are pretty well tried and tested. And just remember that we touched on it in the last one. There are different families of bramble and privet. So it's I forget the name of the privet, but it's the I think its common name is Chinese privet.
Or Japanese privet. That's the gold stuff,
isn't it?
It's Ligstrom ovularum, something like that. Ligstrom, yeah. It's that's the one there. That's pretty gold. You can't really go wrong with that. And
also Ligustum japonicum. Mine loves that, and it's fresh in winter.
It's it's just one of those things that just get the stable option, and then it's a good thing just to spend the rest of the time, when they're a little bit more stable, experiment with a few other options that you might have locally, and just put them in there. They'll either take it or they won't take it. You can't go wrong. I've tried holly and tried all kinds of things. Some leaves actually have natural fungicides in them. I think holly was one of them, if I'm not mistaken. So there's certain things that they know that, okay, avoid this because this leaf will kill fungus, and they just didn't touch it. So and then later finding out those types of things. But it's very rare for them to actually do any damage to the colony. So they will just leave it alone. So they're really smart. Just experiment and enjoy the process. Don't panic. Just before you get them, just make sure that you have access to some of the stable options. And I don't know many people who don't have access to bramble. It grows. Privet's such a common hedge in the UK, and I imagine quite common worldwide. And because it's quite bulletproof, it's year round. It's a great winter option. And bramble again is still an option for me even in the end of December. So I've only got, I think it's only around end of January, early February that I run out into trouble with bramble, and then I just use privet for a while. Not very great quality privet because it's usually pretty scraggy, but you've only got to usually buy yourself a month or so with just filling that gap, and then
my ants don't even care if I'm feeding them brown leaves that are dying. They just still got it.
When they get to a certain size, as the colonies grow, they get much more acceptant. I'd probably throw a football in with mine now, and they'd probably start ripping it apart. They do, as they get bigger, they get much less fussy. I don't know why that is. It might just be because of the sheer, some of the colony, some of the workers just might be fussier than others, and when you've got a bigger colony, you've just got more of the non-fussy ones. Who knows? That's the thing. Just get a couple of easy options and then just experiment. But there's tons of stuff they take. It's like crazy how much.
Yeah, I think I fed my colony some poisonous flowers at one point because they cut the entire flower. It was like a big hand-sized flower, and they cut it all. So it took it all inside, and the day after they had dropped everything outside again. So they must have fed it to the fungus. The fungus said no, and then they just took everything out again. The entire fungus was just cut up, gone. The next day, out in the outworld, cut into small pieces.
Roses are a great option as well. Yeah,
that was a rose, but I tried the same rose a few months later, and they did the same thing. They cut it, and the day after they just dumped it in the outworld.
Because most people spray their roses for whitefly.
Yeah, be careful with the.
It's my own weird plant in the garden.
Yeah, so just be careful with roses from other people's houses and things, because, aside from the fact that people would probably be pretty annoyed if you're stealing their roses, unless you're a night ninja or something. But I've got a couple of roses in the garden, and it may be just those types of that breed of flower, but they weren't big fans of it when they were smaller colonies. But now, my God, it's like the treat of the century. I'll cut it off about 2 centimeters of the stem, so it's got all the petals and the inner part and the bulb and everything, and they will just, there's not a single piece of it left. They take everything. They love it.
All right, I think the next question. I just want to ask you guys, because we haven't talked about this before we started. I'm planning on running this episode a little bit longer. If that is that all right with all of you guys?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Lynn asks again. Thank you, Lynn, for dumping all the good questions. Would water be a good escape prevention? I have my thoughts.
Well, I can confirm it's not a very good option.
Space permitting, if you can do a decent sized water trough, and if you use dishwashing soap in there, like over here we have fairy liquid. I don't know what people have wherever they are, but a few drops of that increases the density of the water to make things fall. The only problem is they're gonna try and build a bridge with fungus. And dead matter to get over it. And if it doesn't have dishwashing soap in it, the ants can float. It needs it in there so they sink and then they don't bother going in.
Yeah,
it's what all the zoos and places use, isn't it? They use water troughs.
Well, I've seen the same thing. I can't remember who said it to me, but they had a tank of kind of like they had a tank with water around the fungus, and once the fungus grew large enough, the workers just bridged out and escaped. Like it wasn't even it was just a joke to them.
So dishwashing soap is what stops that. But like Ninaturu here says, what Lynn says is, what if you keep fish in that water? You couldn't keep fish in that water, not if you're using it as a trough. But yeah, we use talc and ethanol mixed, and it creates the fine powder that you just keep topping up. And that's the most efficient we use on our outworld. And anything with any humidity is just sealed shut anyway.
I think one of the things to bear in mind is it depends where in the setup you're trying to use the escape prevention. Because a lot of escape preventions, they don't do great with humidity. So if you're using oil-based, I'm not a huge fan of oil-based barriers anyway, but they can be just generally crossed through debris, and obviously with leaf cutters, they're always carrying bits of leaves and bits of trash and fungus and things. So I'm not a massive fan of that. Inside the pods themselves is generally really hard to make barriers work and be long lasting, but typically you shouldn't really be opening the pod up a whole lot anyway, unless it's maybe during the founding stages, but at those stages you typically shouldn't really need a barrier. And when they get to the stage where the colony's grown enough where they're rushing out the lid and you can't feed them without ants escaping, then generally that's a time where you add on a feeding outworld as such. And depending on what you have, I mean, what I have with both mine, it's a lidless setup, and I just use Fluon. I've just got just straightforward Fluon. I think it's about 3 centimeter barrier. I've had that with my acros now for probably many months now, and it's the same barrier. They can't cross it. It's just happy days. But that outworld is completely dry, and I think that's what's really important. If you're using the dry outworld with them, Fluon works really well for both of them.
All right. I have tried a little bit of everything. I find with mine, if I don't feed them enough, that's a problem with having a too big colony. They don't care what barrier I have; they will just escape everything. So what I do now is simply due to the prices of olive oil, it's a little bit cheaper than buying all the other oil. I just have olive oil I put on every 2 days, and just follow them because they will escape no matter what barrier I've tested. Just because they are crazy. Oh, actually. After my massive escape that started where I had to wake up at 2 a.m. in the night, I've done something people shouldn't really do, but I just don't want to see it again. It's happened one too many times. I've put my whole table on 4 massive rocks that are standing in a box of water. So if they were to escape, they wouldn't be able to trail out of the box of water. Eventually they would, but it would hopefully last the night or my work day. I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
Wouldn't it?
Exactly. It's not about keeping them in. It's about buying the time to sort the escape. Because that's the danger part, that they just start trailing and just walk away.
Ours didn't escape for months and months and months, and one day they decided they wanted to, and it was carnage. We had like 10,000 workers out, crossing the road. There was leaves glistening down the street. They cut every single weed from us to the church. It was chaos, and we sat there. Sam come in, I called him in, and we sat there with one rule: we picked up every ant that was leaving, because if they're coming, they'll always come back. So every ant that was leaving was getting put into a PTFE tub, and it's carnage. But yeah, they'll decide one day they want to escape, and there's not much you can do to stop them. You just need to keep up with their usual feed routine, I think.
Did you get any comments from people on the streets that day, or was it just?
Yeah, people stopped to take pictures. It was carnage. we had to phone the council and report it, because one of the council's conditions of us being allowed to be a public ant store, pet store, was that we didn't have assets out of containment. And environmental health said we could get a fine, so we reported it. Just so that, because people were taking photos, if they saw that, we'd be in hell of trouble. And they said it just can't happen again, thanks for letting them know. We've got it contained, brilliant. And the very next day we walked into the very same thing, which we didn't report that day. We very swiftly dealt with it. But yeah, it was quite a marvel seeing glistening leaves crossing the road. People didn't know.
It's not even like you can try and deny it's your colony when they're literally bringing the leaves into the front door.
Yeah, they're under our front door, into our building, back up all the way through the pipe network. The total trail, I think I counted at 56 meters.
But that being said, when it comes to escaping ants, the best colonies to have escape are leafcutters, because they're very good at coming back. I'm lucky. I've only had one. I've had about 2 or 3 escapes, but I've caught 2 of them very early on, and they weren't really full escapes. I had one escape where I think they had a good portion of the night, and they were everywhere, like all over the entirety of the floor in different rooms. And what was really funny is they basically left, and they started cleaning my room, in the room that they're in, and they were picking up all types of stuff, little bits of old dried leaves. God knows where they found it from. Bits of like the little. I've got a lot of outworlds I've made in here and things, and the little tiny cutouts from the holes that it cuts for the screws on the acrylic. These little round bits of acrylic. They, for some reason, were obsessed with them, and they gathered them all up, and they'd taken them back to the hole they were escaping from, but they couldn't fit them through the hole, so they just built up this mound of rubbish by where they were escaping from, and they were just constantly trying to get back in. But once you take care of the escape and you block up where they were coming out from, you can just literally remain near the escape part, and they will just come back home. So they're not like a lot of other ants. Yeah, that they will just come back home eventually.
And like, sorry, Sid.
No, crack on.
Like the question Lynn just put here: if they escape, can they be dangerous to other pets and ants? Well, they're not fussed with other colonies. They didn't even go near them. They're just looking for leaves, and they send out the scouts, and then the scouts will find something, or they seem to be very attracted to drafts, which is why they went for the doors. They cause no bother at all. If the diverser escaped, we'd be in hell of a mess, because they would take down any other colony they can get into. Same with Hood and his Geminata. Leafcutters, they just wanted to go and find leaves, and they seem to avoid confrontation with other colonies.
They're the vegans of the ant world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think that's the big thing, isn't it?
Help.
The protein side of things. Most other ants are protein hunters, so or they're generally very territorial. I don't think leafcutters. I think it'd be interesting to see how they interact actually in the wild with other colonies. I imagine
the colonies avoid them because of the numbers. Even army ants will avoid a colony of leafcutters, and they've met in the wild. And I've seen videos of this where army ant trails and leafcutter trails cross each other, and they just walk past each other because of the sheer numbers. They just don't take each other on.
Well, they're no competition, so I think a lot of ants have evolved to probably understand that. But it would make total sense. There's no reason they cause not one single issue to anything when they've escaped. Like I said, they just clean the areas and find little bits of stuff and and bring it back. Some of the stuff they choose is very, very weird. I
Concrete
found
from
that
under our
interesting
floor.
in itself.
Concrete. They were literally pulling concrete out from under our floor. There's a little hole in one of the doors into the floor, and they've ground it out. I don't know how big it is. I need to send a camera down. But one of the escapes, they were pulling out concrete and taking it back to the nest.
The nice thing with Leafcutter is just the reason I'm so scared that my ants escape is because I'm scared that they will move into my house or move underground or relocate. And that's why when my Mesa escaped, I was very scared to see brood, but I luckily didn't see any brood. But I know that if my Ada escape, they can't live in my room. It's only my room that's hot enough, but it's not humid enough. They can't live outside. It's way too cold. And even in midst of summer, when it's hot enough, it's not humid enough. That's something I really like because I know that no matter what, they can't move out. I just need to get them home again because they are no danger to anything.
But, well, the one advantage with escapes is you'd have to have a hell of an escape port, like weakness or a hole, because the queen to fit through that would have to be, it's a big. Yeah. So that's kind of the one advantage. And typically the queens do relocate to new fungus, but I don't think if you had an escape, you'd have to worry too much about your queen being relocated, because I think they'd have to have the time to make an area suitable for her, and you'd probably see them start transporting fungus before she moved. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that from the side of things. But more than anything, I think you'd have to have one serious escape, like a proper pipe detachment or something for the queen to move.
Yeah, and every ant keeper, no matter what colony you get, you're going to get escapes. And of all the colonies we have, the ones I least minded escaping were the leafcutters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lyndon asked also, would it help by giving a longer route to walk, like more tubing?
I said no to this because we've already got 18 meters of tubing.
I agree.
And that's a long ass run, and I counted the total length of their escape to be 56 meters plus the amount of tubing. So when you're looking at 150, 200 foot of trail, it wouldn't really be practical for them to to have that.
No, I don't think it's more based
on. It's more based on hunger, I would imagine. If they're hungry, like 200 feet, that's a stroll in the park for what these things do in the wild. They travel hundreds and hundreds of meters to generally get food. And I watched I forget which one it was, but there was a video on YouTube, a really, really interesting video where a guy documents and follows a trail of leafcutters. And they obviously were really hung up on this certain tree or this certain. So I found that quite interesting as well, that they will travel so much further past other trees to get a prime tree that I guess is something they enjoy the most. And they were walking so far to get this. So they definitely have preferences as to things they like and things they don't like. But, long walks is nothing for them. I think it's probably what they're built for.
I think escape prevention is just key. Same with any species. If you let your guard down, like with any large colony you have, they're going to go out further and explore for food. So there's no more risk with leafcutters than anything else that anyone will keep, really.
Yeah, it's just one of the scary things with one of my latest bigger escapes was that they removed an entire chunk of tubing. So I have a 3 centimeter tube that's just cut in half, and they were just escaping their connection from it was a corner connector, and when I pulled it out to put in cotton, I just removed this little bit which I cut off, and it's just a 2 centimeter, just half tube. They've just removed the entirety of the tube. So if they will escape, there's not too much to stop them.
Could that have been your choice of tube that caused that?
Well, yeah, it's not. It's just normal soft vinyl tubing. I mean, if you had gone with acrylic, then they probably wouldn't have been able to bite. I can see it in all the tubes. I have another tube where they've removed around 3 centimeters, but I can see it, so I've just kept pushing it further and further in, and they just every 2 weeks they remove half a centimeter, so it's not fast at all.
Fix this with a
lot
fit to acrylic then.
I mean, another thing as well. I mean, it can be the type of connector. So typically, the reason ants will choose to chew tubing is when they sense an airflow. So if the tubing connector is not tight enough, or it's designed in a way in which it depends how it's designed. If it's just straightforward sliding tube in with no forms of inner rings that kind of pinch down on the tubing, not only does that make it more difficult for the tube to be pulled out, it creates a better airtight seal. So a lot of the time it's either down to tubes not being cut flush. So if you cut the tube and it's not, when you're looking at it side on and it's nice clean cut, if it's like at an angle, that will allow this open section of tube for them to chew into. But ants will only chew when they sense airflow. So if there's a gap, they can be very, very small. So if it's just like 3D printed connectors and it's just a straightforward slide the tube in, that even things like the layer lines will allow airflow in. When they sense that, it's like a dog on a bone. They do not stop. So they will just keep chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing to try and get to that airflow. So you've just posted the picture there. So I'll put money that the likelihood is that the connector that tube went into was just a straightforward tube with no indentations or tapered connections that pinch down on it. So that near enough eliminates that factor. So it comes down to sometimes the product design. PVC tube can work fine as long as it's you factor in those weaknesses and the parts are designed to kind of compensate for that.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to take some pictures. It's insane how they've just removed tube, but
yeah, they will. Again, I mean, they have the ability. They have the ability to chew through PVC. There's no denying that. The key is to stop the airflow. So have a tight enough fitting, or quite often, I don't know how to describe it, but an inner ring, which just at one point makes it extra tight around the tube, which will mold around the PVC and creates that seal, and it stops that airflow. And when they can't sense an airflow, they don't think of it as anything, so they don't chew it anymore.
And I think that leads quite well into another point. DIY is personally, I have so much DIY with my setup with tube not fitting together, so I have tape so they create a tighter seal and one thing and another. So I personally I wouldn't at all, after my personal experiences and with a massive escape from my other DIY Leafcutter set stuff, to just avoid DIY with Leafcutters, because I mean, if you wouldn't really put Solenopsis in DIY because you're scared that they will escape a bit more. But my Leafcutters, when they are hungry, and it's my mistake because I've grown a massive colony, that they are hard. If you go with the DIY ways, of course it can be possible, but yeah, that's my big weakness with my setup.
Well, I mean, so touching on that point, I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with DIY. You can make DIY work really well. The only problem with DIY is every single DIY is different, and you will usually have to make mistakes to understand where you went wrong. If you went wrong, you may get super lucky. So you may just get everything right if you use the right materials, you use the right seals. You have a good ability with design, you have a good ability with construction, you've got the right tools, whatever it is. If you've got the time and you use things like glass and you use acrylic tubing, you can't really go too wrong. But the only downside to it is every single setup is going to be only as good as its designer. So it depends on your ability. So if you're kind of one of these people who just so that's the only reason I designed setups is to kind of make it so that it could take that guesswork out of it. People can make bigger DIY setups probably for the same price, so it's more cost effective. But there's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't kind of slate on DIYs. But obviously, in your case, it was kind of a lot of last minute tinkering to try and make tubs work, and you were rushing into a lot of solutions because it kind of the growth caught you off guard. So that's I think why you caught, and you're using adapters that not designed for that purpose to try and fit different tubes here and there. And I mean, you're using sellotape. I mean, that kind of
all over the place.
Like that kind of sums up, one of the main reasons. So DIY setups done properly and prepared for, like who's the chap on YouTube that Hidden Empires, DIY setup right there. Done.
Yeah,
he's having it. He's making upgrades and he's doing things like that. And he's made a few things he's improved on, which is great. So there's nothing wrong. It definitely can work. Rich has done DIY, at DIY Outworld tubing, even elements of his pod and things. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just for the average ant keeper, DIY is even for me. I guess in some ways everything I make is DIY, but initially, or I guess even like if I was looking at DIY, I look at it the same as natural setups, and I'm so scared of natural setups because I just suck at all that stuff. I can't make them look pretty. I don't have that eye for things. That's where everything's always so clinical and sort of clean looking and things. I love natural setups. Some of the stuff that Ryan, Antscapes does is just breathtaking. And, I definitely think that certain ants, they do better in those. But yeah, definitely. So, DIY's got a place. I wouldn't hate on it too much. But I do think
what I want to say is mostly because in the past I've done a lot of DIY with. I need an outwell. Okay, I get a box, drill a hole, put a tube in. I did this with my first trash chamber. I put escape prevention, but it was PTFE, so it didn't last with the humidity. A point that's where my first bad experience. And I've just tested it's been a lot of I've using this product with another product. So I have Wakooshi pots, I have sim ant connections. I don't know what tube I have. I have whatever tube fits the holes, and I have an ant store box as well. And none of these things are originally made to fit together. And this is where initially I just put them into each other, and it worked fine until the ants were hungry, and then they wanted to escape. So, like Sid says, if you have a proper mind, you can easily do DIY like Rich have done. So I don't want to say no to it. I just want to say for people with a more young kid mind, be careful, because I definitely don't think that far ahead, because I think of what works here now. And that's not the way to go with DIY, at least not with Ada, just because they can grow to big size. And that's something I never really have had struggles with my Campanodus Herculinus colony, because there are 15 workers in total. And in my Ada, I can look at 10,000 maybe just hanging on the walls of my setups. So that's what I kind of want to say. It's just the crazy amount of numbers that makes me have an escape every 2 days, because then they slowly, they're just testing the barriers and testing everything, because it's a big colony. And if you never feed them enough to get that stage, you of course never will have these problems. And if I just had all Wakooshi pots and Wakooshi connections, or another brand, if there was another good brand, then I wouldn't have these problems either. But it's because I'm using so many different things together and just taping everything together, because I had an escapee, and then I put cotton between two tubes to make the size disappear, so they could go walk in. But then they pulled the cotton away. What's up, Rich?
That's a rookie error.
Oh yeah, definitely. So then I used electric tape around my thinner tube so I could stick it in. Wakooshi actually made this idea, so thanks to you, Sid, because that worked much, much better. Electric tape around the thin tube all the way so it became a thick tube, and then I pushed them together. That worked perfect until the minor workers. The thing is, the small other workers are 1-2 millimeters, and they somehow still managed to escape. So I put a sellotape around the connection, so now the inner tape connection is protected by outer tape, and they still manage to get out of that because they can bite through the tape. So
I mean, ultimately, I think I wouldn't let this dissuade people too much. I mean, you are an exception to the rule, and you are I'm going to call you the tree feeder. Like forests need to fear you because the amount of leaves you're going through. And most people, I think it was nice. It was good what you did. I think that it's important that you've kind of documented really nice. It's a bit like, prime example is the work that Ant Hood did for Geminata. I think that was a tremendously important documented series of his experiences with Geminata, because I think that hopefully now people have got that proven, storyline of what happens and what you can expect when it comes to Geminata. I mean, I've got that colony now.
That didn't dissuade anyone. I still
okay.
have back on.
Well, okay, but
not everyone watches the videos.
I'm going to have some points to make on it, but it's at least they're educated now, and I think a lot of people just underestimated them, didn't understand the risks. There's I can definitely see the appeal. Like I've got them now. You can control. I can confirm you can control the size, and it's all down to protein control, feeding. They've been maintained for 6 months, and they're no further or larger than they were 6 months ago. So if you can maintain them, it's not the easiest thing to do, but you can definitely do it. And I think the important thing is if you overfeed them, it's what can happen. It's what can happen when you do. And I think he's quite nicely shown that he tried everything, but look what happens. They escaped, and what he didn't expect was to have them wiping out all his colonies on an escape. And that's those risks that people need to take, and people should be prepared of. And much is the same with leafcutters. What Holifer's done, and what happens if you feed them loads of leaves, and but that shouldn't dissuade people. These are just examples of what happens when you give ants what they basically hunt for in the wild, and that is food. The growth is directly linked to their intake. So it's been proven that if you give them the right amount of leaves, in multiple occasions, if you control their leaf intake, you can maintain the colony size, and then you don't have to worry about escapes too much. Okay, you'll have a few escaping, but you generally get a couple hundred escape, and if it's not a major thing. And I don't want people to be dissuaded by keeping leaf cutters because they think that, oh my god, they're going to get to millions and they're going to get huge. No. Holifer's done a great thing. He's shown what can happen when they get to that massive stages, and then all the panics and the issues you can have with setups, and the DIY stuff that you have to do because you just physically, the cost involved.
We make the mistakes so other people don't have to, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why my everything failed was because I realized that I had made a mistake and I had fed them way too much, and I started to feed them less. So in the midst of summer, I gave them leaves every day, and I gave them an entire bag of leaves every day, and they just exploded. They ate everything. But as it became harder and harder to get leaves, I started to feed them every second day. And that's when they escaped. It wasn't when they were happy and well fed. It was when I started to test feeding them less and started realizing how big a mistake I had made with giving them
all the escapes. I think most ants are the same. The escapes will tend to usually happen when the colony gets large and it gets hungry, because they have the manpower to press barriers, to press a lot of things. They'll escape if there's a gap, or there's an easy opportunity. But a lot of the time, for example, like when Hood had his escape, exactly the same outworld, nothing really changed, but they just didn't have the numbers. They weren't hungry enough. When they did grow, they started testing the boundaries of everything and chewing their way and all this type of stuff. The same with the atta. They're chewing tubes, they're doing kinds of stuff because they've got the numbers to try and really just test every single nook, cranny, gap, air gap, everything. They'll eventually find a way. They're smart, so they will find a way.
Right, guys, we are beginning. I mean, we have 2 questions remaining still, I feel. So who knows how long that will take. Sid, you have talked a little bit about what you like to feed your colony. Jake, what kind of leaves? You said before earlier that you dried them, but what kind of leaves, a bit more specifically, have you seen work best?
Well, definitely bramble, which is like everyone's stable, but apple leaves have been my go-to, and yeah, the acro and the atta like really enjoy the apple leaves, so I can give it to both of them as well, which is quite nice. So yeah, definitely like apple leaves are my favourite leaf of this year, at least. But I don't have any privet either, like because there's no kind of built up areas for quite a while. There's like not really any privet.
On the country road life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think my favorite leaf this past year has really. I loved bramble last year, but the problem with my colony was I had to feed them so much. So just the thing that I had to take a scissor and cut the bramble, that's where I didn't like them. So I went for maple. I think they are maple, and the thing with them was it was massive leaves, and I could pull them off, and that's why that was the leaves I wended. I used a lot this year. Rich, you have to go quite soon, so we will. I don't think we can end it in 10 minutes, but yeah, Rich and Sam, what is your guys' preferred leaves for your colonies?
Dandelion, every time.
Still the same answer. That's what you said last time as well.
Still the same answer. It is the go-to leaf, and we've got a lovely patch down by us that is like 15 seconds walk, and Sam gets very embarrassed when he needs to go and collect the leaves. Sometimes I make him do it just because I know how much embarrassed he is standing at the side of the road, bending down, picking leaves up while everyone going into the Indian and Chinese are looking. And you always get stopped, don't you, Sam?
Oh,
I never get stopped. And so I said, well, if you get stopped, Sam, just tell him, if you don't want to go into ants and, go into a big conversation, just say it's for the rabbits. So he did that one day. He said, oh, it's for the rabbits. And then the person got into a long debate with him about how you shouldn't feed rabbits dandelion leaves.
And I had to go on and pretend that it was okay because I knew what I was doing. I don't even eat rabbits. Yeah,
it's weird that you let you feel like, because I find personally when I've done dandelion, it doesn't add a lot of, because it's such a thin, like flimsy leaf that it doesn't add a lot. They don't do much with it, sort of thing.
Yeah, we're not talking.
They love it.
We're not talking little ones. We're talking the big, massive leaves that you get. The chunky ones.
But even like I don't know, unless it's different stuff to the stuff I'm getting, but when I get it wilts really quickly because it's generally quite there's not much structure to dandelions. They're quite a soft-bodied leaf, and like when I get them, they go quite wilty quite quickly, and they're fairly big, but they kind of cut it up, and then it just kind of like it doesn't. I don't notice like much growth in the fungus when they use dandelion compared to like the sort of more solid, rigid type leaves.
Yeah, but I mean, they process it so much faster though. So yeah,
well, I guess it depends on the volume. I mean, I'm basing this on like direct volume to volume here. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
We go and.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because I'm thinking like I'm comparing it to like a handful of bramble and a handful of dandelion, and when I put the dandelions in there, it's like they take it all, but it's like I don't really see much of it on. Because they break it down because it's so soft bodied. It's almost like they turn it to like a mush because it's so soft, right. and it's almost like it does grow. That obviously the fungus grows in it, but it doesn't seem to. I don't see like the leaf chunks that you get when they cut like bramble and they cut privet, and that's kind of what dissuaded me from it because it's
young colonies. See, we use it routinely because it's so effective for young colonies without the big workers to get through the tougher privet leaves or laurel leaves. So it's soft enough for the small colonies to really use dandelion. And then it's always a preference for the big colony too. I mean, they like privet and they like laurel and they like rose and they like so many other things. We've been messing around with rhododendrons.
Rhododendron's good option.
Yeah,
I mean,
perfect winter.
The thin leaf ones, not the fat leaf ones.
Mine takes it all.
But dandelion is always our go-to, and it's so convenient to get. They get fresh dandelion all the time.
It's so strange because my colony doesn't like it. I fed it twice just due to this, what you've said. I've just let it die. I've just fed them, and they haven't. They don't
I
even
think
touch
with dandelions though and stuff, there are a lot of different subspecies of that.
Yeah.
So
I'm
that's
talking about the triangle leaves, not the rounded ones. And I know there's loads.
That much I don't know. I just know the ones with the weird puffy flowers.
The leaves are like little arrows, not the curved ones. But not that makes a difference to most people.
I think I've fed them the curves one.
I mean, one of the good things I would suggest, and it's one thing I started doing last year, was if you have the option to do so, is maybe just buying a couple of bushes of things, and if you're planning to keep these long term, is you can buy small little sort of 1.5 2 foot privet small starter bushes. You can get like 10 of them for like £15 on. I mean, in the UK, you can get them on eBay. The one that we mentioned earlier, and they came, and it's just they're these little bushes, and I've just planted them in the garden, just apart, and they'll make like a nice hedge. And when they get started, they may not be much use for you'd have to give them a year to get established, but then the following year, you'd be pretty much set. So
as long as you don't overgrow your colony at the first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like that aside, even if you're overgrowing them, even if you just use them, for example, I've been growing. I found a really good subspecies of bramble, and as you know, Holifer, because we were documenting through the summer, I took snippets. I cut sections off, and I buried the cuts, the sort of trimmings in some soil, and I did, I think 10 or how many of it was, and about 5 or 6 of them actually eventually took, and they're now growing. I've got potted version of those brambles growing, and I kind of have them. I go locally and I collect leaves and stuff for them, but if I just can't be bothered one week or whatever, I've got that potential supply. And the nice thing with privet, like a lot of plants really, some more than others, but the good thing with privet, when you trim privet, so if you take the fresh growth, let's say 6 inches, if you cut it, what will happen is that will then sprout out into 2 new stalks. So by taking trimmings to feed your leaf cutters, you encourage the plant to grow 2 new stalks, which then obviously increases the growth overall. So by having a few of these bushes on the go, it annoys me because sometimes I see a really nice bush, like one of my neighbours or whatever will have a really nice bush and it's growing, it's so lush, and I'm like, oh, that is brilliant for my leaf cutters. And then they go and bloody cut their hedge and trim it back, to its nice square shape, but they've taken all the nice, good, fresh growth away. But if that was my own personal hedge, I'd not do that, and I'd be just constantly living off that fresh supply. So, unfortunately, because it's not a naturally growing bush, most of them tend to be in people's hedges or gardens, and they have to trim them because they grow so damn fast. They have to maintain by cutting them back. So, unfortunately, that's the one downside when it comes to winter. Quite often, the end of summer, they do a trim back, and then that's limited my supply for winter. But going forward, growing your own or planning to grow your own isn't necessarily a bad idea, and things like that. Privet's a really good option for it.
Yeah, I've become very lucky and unlucky. I have the same problem. People cut out the privets completely. But since I'm walking my dog, I get some funny roots within forests and around people's houses. And there's like this walk line around a whole residential area that it's just littered with small and quite big privet bushes just freely roaming because they're just out in the forest. Seeds have, of course, somehow spread. So, yeah, that's become my new backup winter plan. So yeah, that's nice. But yeah, I did the experimentals together, you said, and it works so well. But the problem is my colony. The problem with my colony is just that I can take all of the leaves in my garden to 2 days feeding. Go ahead, Sid.
I mean, ultimately, look, we've dwelled on a lot of the negative points of leafcutter keeping in this podcast. I mean, these are really just all, mostly just things to point out of challenges that we've come across. so that people can kind of ultimately, think ahead and overcome these issues, or maybe just, stop them happening in the first place. But, leaf cutters, if I could still, I think I said this in the last, if I could scale back to just keeping one colony, it would be my Atta mexicana, it would be my leaf cutters. If I go for two, probably be both the leaf cutters. They are such a fascinating ant, and they're such an interesting ant to keep. And one of the things I love, of all ants I keep, I've learned a lot from them. But what I love about leaf cutters, they will increase your knowledge so much about ant keeping, but it will also increase your knowledge when it comes to the horticultural life and plants. And I mean, I've learned so much about growing things, about where to find plants, the differences between plants.
You've lost all those calories walking to get them.
Yeah, I mean, they keep you active, and I'm being deadly serious. That's not a joke. They have kept me more active as a colony, because I've actively gone, do you know what? I'm going to take the kids for a walk. Mrs. like, you feeling all right? I'm like, no. Like, she's like, why are you going for a walk? Well, I need to get some leaves for my leaf cutters as well. So I'm like, she's like, oh, right, that's the reason. But, there's just things like that where I kind of think, do you know what? It's got me out of the house. And I might not have done that before. I might have then thought, do you know what? Yeah. So it does. It kind of encourages you to be outdoors more. Even in the summer, I'm constantly looking around the different plants, trying different things, Googling leaves, and it's weird because I might have previously walked down a pathway and just looked ahead. Now I find myself looking at the bushes, looking at, everything, like what type of leaf that is. I know plants I didn't know before. I know things about, the science behind plants. I know when different things are sprouting. It's just, but not only that, but just cutting and studying the plants, you learn about insects on the plants. So they're one of the few ants that they'll actually teach you so much more about nature than just ant keeping, which I think is really, really cool.
I couldn't agree more. The only reason I have so much struggles with the colony is because I learned it as I did it. People like antimatters, you are prior to all. You have all the knowledge of don't overfeed them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I mean, I still think my leaf cutters are amazing. It's the only colony I can just sit down and just stare into, just looking at them tending to the fungi. I mean, you can look at ants taking care of brood for a certain amount of time, but just looking at the fungi is just different from anything within normal ants. And I think, Jake, I mean, I don't know what you've of course mostly just listened in tonight. I'm not guessing that you can see yourself in any of the problems of overfeeding or of escaping and all of this. Have you any problems with that?
Overfeeding wise, I think I'm definitely kind of going to avoid that as much as I can, even though it is so easy to get carried away. But I'm going to not let myself get too carried away, which hopefully will, I guess, stop many escapes. Although every so often, like the other day, I put them on the bed and the pipe popped off and the whole bed was covered in atta 10 minutes later. And yeah, I get it, like it just happens sometimes. So just got to be ready for when it does. So I quickly pulled out my USB Hoover and was hoovering everything. Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to population control, the important things to know is don't hold back at all on feeding when you first get them. The important thing is to not let food become stale. So give them fresh leaves. If they don't consume it, remove it after, like if it's not consumed in 2 days, get it out. Give it like half a day or a day, and then add fresh leaves in, and just keep that and give them as much as they'll consume, but don't let it get old, and just keep that up. And eventually it will you'll notice they'll be eating more and more and more and more and growing faster and faster. Get them to the stage that you're happy with them at. And at that point, don't stop, but just massively scale back, because if you're, it depends on the size you're trying to keep. But a good rule of thumb is give them as much as they can consume in, let's just say, maybe 3-4 hours. If they're still got some that's left at that point, that's the amount you should have given them. whatever's left is the point that you should have not given them that much. So, but then just keep an eye on the fungus. And if you see that the fungus is still growing in size, you know that you need to just add less and less each time. So it's important to give them that regular supply, because I think that's what the ants will be feeding from. That's where they'll be getting their sugars, their carbs from. And, as long as you're regularly giving them some, they're always going to have that mortar. They're always going to have that fungus to grow new fungus from. But what you want to try and do is keep it at a stage where as much as is dying and being removed as they're growing, and that's how you hold them at a certain size. But it is good to get them to that size as quickly as possible, because that will affect the brood production and the size. And I think that what's important is to have a good size colony, because that is also very important to how quickly you can recover from issues. Like I had, where I lost a massive amount of fungus in that summer heat wave. I was lucky that I had a massive amount of workers, so by giving them a big feed, I managed to recover. There were so many workers, and they had enough fungus to use as foundation still, thankfully, that they could recover that from that quite quickly. But yeah, the amount to feed them is very important if you want to maintain the size. And I think that's where some people can go wrong. Obviously, throwing trees at them, they will just grow and grow and grow, and because they're going to be thinking, look, hell, we've got so much food here, we can, why not? And you can't really blame them.
Yeah, I think it's one of the few colonies that you can completely maintain one size to another size. You can't really just say, I like this size, let's keep it at this size, I want it a little bit bigger. And that's the thing, I've gone crazy and gone massive, but I see the same thing as you see in a small colony. It's not like I see anything different. It's not like you see the colony work different. It's a bit more trail I can see, but it's in the core, it's the same. You get, rather it's a big colony or a small colony. And that's something I don't really feel you can see with other ants like Camponotus, like a Herculinus colony. You can't really see the same in a small founding stage as you can in a massive in a massive colony. But with Ada, nothing have really changed with their size. So the only reason I wanted a big colony was to say I had a big colony. So, but normally you don't need to say that. So
yeah, I think for most ant keepers, you don't necessarily need to have that. I think if you want to keep Atta, a football-sized fungus is a really good amount. You'll get typically all the size workers by that point, and you should be able to really just see and enjoy everything. They're not too heavy on feeding. You can just have a couple times a month and get a good amount of leaves, and they'll last. And that's really, really, really easy. And with the acro, because they don't have very big differences in their worker sizes, they don't have super majors. You could pretty much get away with I guess a small melon size, sort of, and you can pretty much enjoy them. If I had a colony that was 10 times larger, I wouldn't get any more enjoyment. They wouldn't do anything more. They're just going to require so much more space and be more challenging, more likely to escape. So yeah, you're right. The larger the colony in leafcutters doesn't necessarily mean you witness a whole lot more. Even with the trails, because they're so, you could very easily create long trails with actually quite a small colony. It's just getting them used to that trail, which can be the harder point. And obviously more workers, that means they're a little bit easier for that, but it's still possible with smaller colonies. So yeah.
The thing is also with a small colony, a small fungi still equals to 1,000, 10,000 workers, because there's an incredible amount of workers inside the fungi that you don't really see until something goes wrong. So you can get small colonies to trail because even though the fungi is small, there are still a lot of workers inside. But I think we shall wrap this episode up. We are around the 2-hour mark now, which is the longest podcast ever, except for the Ant Keeping 101 podcast. I don't know if you guys have any ant news, but I would like to say congratulations to Aesthetic Ants on hitting 5,000 subscribers, and he has done a 5,000 subscriber special, and that was my ant news. Jake, I don't know if you have ant news, but at least the winner and series of the year have been awarded. What were they?
Yeah, we've got the video of the year winner was Antscapes. You were second though, Oliver. It was really close as well. It was a tie. I couldn't. I don't know. I just
Betrayal.
love that tank though. That tank is so good.
Betrayal.
But so Antscapes won Video of the Year with his Mountain Paludarium and his Trapjaw ants, and then Ants Hood won Series of the Year with his Solenopsis geminata and kind of their journey throughout last year. Well, not last year yet, but it will be actually by the time this comes out.
Yeah, because it's 2023 today.
I can't believe Holifer didn't get an award. That's shocking.
He did come
two second places and a third place.
No way. I mean, the Mountain Paludarium's good, but depends what you're judging. I mean, if you're judging setups, then yes, the Paludarium wins. But if it's Video of the Year, I think Holifer's got that one down.
Yeah, that My Video was something special. That.
Yeah, I mean, by the time you're.
Here.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, it's like when I was listening, I thought I didn't even tune in. I'm not gonna lie, I only just very recently watched the award, because I was just like, ugh, I thought Holifer's got to be a shoe-in for that video with the. I mean, well, there's even the Mesa Barbarous escape was quite a big video, because obviously that went quite viral sort of thing. Yeah. But obviously the Mite video, through having voice actors and things in there, and third person interviews, and it was crazy. I thought that was going to be a shoe-in, but I didn't vote, so I can't.
I think Ryan may have fiddled with the votes a little bit.
I didn't vote.
So I was thinking, like, should I vote with all my fake accounts? And I'm like, nah, let's just see what.
Oh, you should have, because I do believe that a certain someone got like half his family to vote as well.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. It's one of these.
Well,
is it?
It matters what you made, what you put out, and what you think of your own quality. I can say that a video that's released on this Sunday that you guys will see, but people may have seen already. That's a fine video, but I'm really, really looking forward to my next upcoming Tetsumaru and Backyard video. I've made the script, and if the script works out, it's not gonna be the Might video 2.0, but it's gonna be it's gonna be epic, I hope. But yeah, Lynn, Mesocephalotus update. Is there anything new to say, or is it a status quo?
Nothing interesting yet. They have a bunch of eggs, like 6 or 7 eggs. Other than that, I cannot really see much, except that they're pulling the cotton like crazy.
Oh, I just read that you said no new ants news.
Yeah, that's all the news. Yeah, I had to hop off because it's time to go for me.
Yeah, it's
so
all right.
That's all I have to say.
Well, it's been lovely adding a lot of questions from your side. Sam and Sid, any ant news that you have discovered throughout this? Well, I
mean, it's hard mentioning this, because obviously this podcast comes out in like a week, is it?
Oh yeah, it's 7 days, but well, it's
so like an Antimatter's ANN surely covers all of the news anyway. So it's
I would like to say that Ant News was actually made before ANN. It was actually news that ANN was made on Ant News at one point.
Oh, so. This is getting controversial now, isn't it? Oh, this is awkward with Antimatters being inside the podcast right now. Oh,
yeah, it's not too good if you decide to join. No, it's not too good.
But to be honest, it makes more sense the way that Antimatters does it, because it's fresh. So having it on a podcast, because when I listen back to these things, I'm like, and you're talking about the news, it's like, that news was like last week. Oh wait, yeah, I forget these are recorded in the past, sort of thing. So whereas ANN, not slating the Ant Pods news, but the ANN is fresh.
Yeah, and in my defense, the initial reason why we made Ant News was mainly just to shout out like some funny quirks we saw, like Ant Notes. We shouted out him before he got a video that went semi-viral, and it was he listened to it a few months later, and that's the kind of thing I like to give shout outs to people who may have been overlooked.
Trying to think what's happened this week, sort of thing. I think Bruma Ants is about to hit 1K, which is nice. Antimatters, how far are you from 1K?
Oh, miles off, I think. I think
what are you on?
689, I think.
Okay. So like probably a couple of months then, and you'll be there. And because it's always nice. It's always a nice milestone for people, and it's just nice to see new ant channels come. Because I feel like, unfortunately, like the ant hobby's growing, and it's nice being on this side of the table of things and seeing how much the ant hobby's growing. Because obviously, like people like me and Rich can physically see through sales volumes and trends and all types of things, insights. Because of all the website insights we see, how many people are new to the site, how many people are coming from which countries, so we get these really cool statistics, and we can see how big the hobby's growing and how fast it's growing. And yet it seems like the content creators have, are almost a little bit shrinking, which is strange. And they kind of came in generations as to, the older generation. Holiday, you probably remember this better than I can. But there was like a previous generation, which was like Rob J and Ants Britannia, Ants Scandinavia, Ants Britannia, Ants Manitoba. There was another one as well.
Yeah, that was the.
There was a guy you had in one of the pods. What was his name?
Ants. Oh yeah, Aussie Ants.
No, another one.
The Carabera one.
He was a guy. He was quite scientific. He had a channel. He does videos occasionally now and again, but not for a long time. He was in one of your very first, I think, Ant pods, or the old version of the pod you did.
And we have had Aussie Ants, Nova Ants.
No. It wasn't a guest. It was actually a speaker. You had a team.
The Urban Ant Keeper. I'm just reading through.
Oh god, it was a guy. I forget the name.
It's going
to really bug me now. No, he was actually one of like the hosts of one of the. You did a pod before, and it was like 4 of you.
Oh yeah, Jake. The other Jake.
Could be Jake.
My Living World Ants.
My Living World Ants. Yeah. So there was like him. So there was an older generation of the content creators, and I was like, I caught them all at the end of their generation. And I'm guessing it's obviously just because they got older and they've moved on to different things and stuff. And, maybe they've fallen out of the hobby. But, like even like Nordic Ants and stuff, even though he's kind of made a little bit of a resurrection. But it's just funny how they kind of come in waves. And then there was like the newer generation where it was like you and Aesthetic Ants and a couple of the others. And then obviously you got like Hood and Antimatters and Ramblings. And there's a few of them coming through, but it's like, I don't know, there's just like this next generation. I'm not seeing many of them, which is a shame. And I'm kind of hoping that a few more of them resurrect. Or not resurrect, but appear.
I hate to directly quote Aesthetic, EA, but I think it's a lot due to shorts and stuff like that. Because I think if you look at the older videos, my videos change pretty much from video to video as I test what I like doing and I test what people like responding at, which is not good for the algorithm, but it's fun for me. But if you look at old videos like Ants Britannia, like Ants Scandinavia, they are all just slow and steady. But today everything is so fast, so where new ant keepers should have gone for the slow and steady route, they go for the shorts, and then they just like
could be. Yeah, it could be.
No, we don't want to do the shorts, and then they disappear again.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame because it's
not
a concern. It is a concern for the sort of the ant keeping hobby in general. Because if that's going to ruin things, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of TikTok and things and the likes and stuff. So I'm not really I don't see much from that side of things. I'm quite heavy into the YouTube side, and it'd be nice to see more people getting into that. But maybe you're right. Maybe the younger generation, the newer keepers now, newer content creators are moving more into that shorts and TikTok life, which is a shame because it doesn't leave many of you now that it's only you and Aesthetic Ants and Antimatters and not a whole lot really that are making regular content.
But the problem is also, if I can go on TikTok and get easy 1,000 views on a phone recording, I got 6 million on a phone recording, and I can spend 80 hours doing a YouTube video to get 1,000 views. So I understand why new people see, it's way easier to go the TikTok way. But yeah, it's not so good for the hobby. I agree.
It's not. Well, I mean, the downside with the shorts is they're short and they disappear. They don't really, they're fresh in the moment, and they're not. If you search in Google, how to care for my Mesobarbarus, I don't really think you're going to get sent to TikTok videos and YouTube shorts, whereas you'll be sent, in essence, to, more likely, you'll probably be diverted to a 10-year-old video from one of the old ant keepers, which, with how fast the hobby's growing and information's improving, could be very out-of-date information. So, it's interesting. It's trends and how things are happening. Hopefully it doesn't have too much of a detriment to the hobby in general. But I think that's a topic for another time.
Yeah, we actually did a little bit of that in episode 15 or something like that, where we talked about TikTok. But yeah, I agree. It's I think we shall call that for this episode. It's been a very enjoyable episode. I have been really looking forward to this episode, but it's always hard getting 2 extra people on board, and then Sam just came in right in the middle and said, I want to join as well.
Which was whipped by Rich.
You know what? This is really funny.
Be here or you're going to get sacked.
It's what it looks like. I can assure you, and I messaged Rich after, said, are you in the podcast today? Because it's about leafcutters. It just so happens it's the one day I'm actually at home on a Wednesday, not on a train or stuck somewhere with no internet. I was like, I'll do it. And now I realised afterwards, I was thinking to myself, it does look like Rich has forced me to do it. Because I can assure you it's not the case at all. And I messaged him after to see if he was on the podcast. But, of course, you can say what you think what you think.
Yeah, I don't trust you. But yeah, that's that's been it for this podcast, guys. I've really enjoyed myself. I always enjoy when Rich and Sid joins, because both of you share some amazing inside knowledge, and just generally what you're thinking. Pod 30 is currently scheduled to be best conditions to keep ants with red lids, with dark, with temperature and all of that. So I'm looking forward to another one with a good topic to discuss. But I want to say thank you all for listening in. Be sure to share this with all of your friends if you have any friends that may be interested in leafcutter ant keeping. Again, we may have talked a little bit negatively towards keeping leafcutters. Don't listen to that. We just want to share some knowledge that we have discovered doing our keeping of leafcutters. They are definitely a dream species and still to keep. I can just stare at my ants walking up the rope with broccoli pieces at the moment in the background, and it's just amazing. But I want to say you will hear more from us at the Ant Pod next week.